Good morning, everybody. I'm Sam Albrecht. I'm the Director of the Office of Regulatory Oversight. I work with the Building Codes and Standards Program and the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program. But today we're here to talk about building codes and standards and the Technical Advisory Committee. So this is our second of a planned at least 6 meetings. We've got a lot on the agenda to talk about today, so I just want to jump into it. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so when I share my screen, I lose you guys. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Amelia and Donnie, if you guys would let guests in as they pop in, I'd appreciate it. I do have the chat open also, and we will try to make sure everybody gets in. As you know, this is the Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and we do record these and then post them to the website. And I need to get my slides to advance. Here we go. So here's the agenda for today. We are going to talk a little, we'll just jump into the guidelines overview and scope. Then we'll do the Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready code. We'll talk about this a standardized climatic standards for modular in Colorado. Talk a little bit about fire suppression system requirements. That still seems to be a concern of some of the modular manufacturers, and there's some confusion with the Denver Fire Prevention and Control requirements. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about the ICC NBI standards 1200 and 1205. We'll talk a little bit about tiny homes. I really want to hear from manufacturers and local governments and anybody else that wants to talk about tiny homes. As you know, HB 221242 was signed in 22. We worked really hard last year to get them all in there. And then interest dropped a little bit, but it seems to be coming back, and I'm not sure why, but I've got 2 meetings with tiny home manufacturers that are out of state that are interested in the system, or interested in the program, and we are getting quite a bit of interest. We also did another full-day session at the tiny home, or at the Colorado chapter of ICC Educational Institute up in Loveland. And it was a packed house. There were 70 or 80 people in that room, all primarily local governments, but also some fire department folks and some other stakeholder groups. So it was a really good presentation, and I'm not sure we'll do it for a 3rd year in a row, but there is still interest out there. And then I want to talk about, if we can get to it, boy, forgive that typo on that next bullet. Moving forward with the 2021 code set adoption versus the 2024 codes, or staying on the 2018 codes. And then we'll try to wrap this up by 10:30 or so. If there's anything else you guys want on this agenda or a future agenda, please let me know and we'll get it wrapped up. I am considering inviting some guests to some of this. One of the guests might be from the Colorado Energy Office. Another one might be from Denver Fire Prevention and Control. And another one might also be the ICC NBI standards folks, if they're have offered to come onto a TAC meeting at some point and kind of go through those 2 standards. So if you have guests that you think that would be interested in this, let me know. I'm going to start pushing out the newsletter again and making these meetings a little more widely known, so that we can get stakeholder input too. But these have been properly noticed as public meetings. Next meeting also, we need to have that open meetings and Colorado Open Records request briefing from the Attorney General's office. So I'm hoping everybody can come to that meeting. And what we'll do is we'll start here. we'll make a motion and take a vote to move over, but I need at least 10 people to vote to go into executive session. And then we will go into another private room that I'm going to set up for that. And we will then have about a 15-20 minute presentation from our attorney on Colorado open records and Colorado open meetings. So hopefully everybody will get that on their schedule. I'll try to get that meeting notice out a lot earlier than I did this one, and we'll be able to go. I know I had at least one TAC member tell me today that the other day he couldn't join today because of a conflict. And that's Dean. He represents our architecture stakeholder group. He sent in some comments on some stuff that I'll share as appropriate. Any questions on that so far? All right. So introductions, I think almost from the folks that are looking here, everybody but Lee, we had him introduce himself a little earlier, is a frequent flyer here at the TAC meetings. So I'm not going to spend any time on that. Guidelines, overview, and scope. As we get more and more stakeholder groups and stakeholder folks into these meetings, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. You know, priority time will be given to the TAC members. Guests are welcome. We recommend that you raise your hand in the meeting. For new members of the public, and this worked out very well last year, where we didn't want to have to go back to start one, and they weren't quite sure of the legislation and the statute. So if everybody, but I think everybody here is aware that our controlling statute is 2432, 3301 through 3329, and the administrator's rule or 8 CCR 1302-14. Here we only address Colorado law and Colorado rules. It's nice to hear what's going on outside. It's nice to hear about industry initiatives, especially as they might reflect on our rules and statute changes that might be coming down the road. So we're happy to discuss those briefly. But again, we have to do what is in our laws and our rule. And this is part of our rulemaking process. So we go through all these things. We try to see what rules we need to be updated. As I mentioned last time, there may be technical updates. We're going to talk about code updates. And we don't have any new legislation yet. But there are some things that might affect the industry, including the ADU bill that is floating through the state legislature right now. Keep us moving. That we added this last bullet here at the end of the TAC last time, and that was to provide comments in the form which can be easily adopted into the administrative rules. And so we'll have lots of time. Once we get a little further in this, we'll start looking at actual drafts of the rules. We've got a lot of work to do before that, but we, for example, if we adopt a new code set, say the 2021 code set, then we will need to look at all the amendments we've made in the 2018 version and see about updating it to the 2021 version. So everybody good so far? Anybody have any questions on what we're doing here today? All right, good. Hearing none, we'll keep moving. I've got 2 slides, I think, here on the model electric ready and solar ready code. Everybody should have got this slide deck. These are the final published code docs that are on that clickable link out of the Colorado Energy Office. So be sure and take a look at that if you haven't already. And then they have a whole page dedicated to this, and with lots of background information and technical notes that may also come into play here. We are looking at having maybe the next meeting, the head of the Colorado Energy Office show up and have a little Q&A So if that's a possibility, if you guys would like him here, let me know and I'll try to make that happen. All right, this is a very busy slide, but as Mo mentioned last time, we have to talk about Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready code in addition to moving to the 2021 IECC by January. This is out of the statute. I cut and paste this 2432-3305. Our section 3.5A1, on or before January 1, 2025, the division shall adopt and enforce an energy code that achieves equivalent or better energy performance than the 2021 IECC and the Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready code language developed for adoption by the Energy Code Board pursuant to 2438.5-4015. So this energy code must apply to factory-built structures and hotels, motels, multifamily structures in areas of the state where no construction standards for hotels, motels, and multifamily structures exist. Now, there is another piece of that 3.5A, and that is C, and that says, notwithstanding any other provision of this subsection, the division may make any amendments to an energy code that the division seems appropriate, so long as the amendments do not decrease the effectiveness of energy efficiency of the energy code. So with that said, does anybody want to kick off a discussion on this, on the solar Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready code language? And I'm going to drop out of share so I can see everybody's face.
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, has anybody taken a look at that? Oh, Tim, you've got your hand up. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, good deal. Thanks, Sam. Hi, all. Just to let everybody know, if they don't, I have been a member of the State Energy Code Group.
Perfect. I thought I recalled that.
Yeah, and so I was one of the 21 members who helped write the first phase, which is what Sam's talking about. It was the part of that state legislation that passed. And with that being said, Broomfield, my jurisdiction, also, we were the first, at least in the Front Range, to actually adopt it, and it went into effect this past January 1st for all new permits issued for new residential, single-family, duplex townhomes, and all new commercial. So for better or worse, I know the code pretty well, and me and my staff are going through the struggles of making sure on how to enforce it through plan review and soon to be into inspections. So I'm happy to share as we go through that discussion of potential impacts with this adoption through the Division of Housing for this group, and offer whatever assistance I can, at least from whether the intent of the codes. I've been asking a lot of questions with Adam Berry through our enforcement aspect and what that means, and getting some good answers, probably coming up with some pretty good ideas to do some modifications. The phase 2 portion has just kicked off, which is the second half of that state legislation to require to expand onto the Electric Ready and Solar Ready code that's already been adopted. And it's a low carbon energy code. I forget the exact name, but we had our first kickoff meeting last week. We're going to be meeting twice a month between now and the end of January to have that in place. So that'll be forthcoming. So anyways, that's kind of, at least I know it. I'm not sure I understand it. If there's any bad parts of that code, it wasn't me.
Well, thanks, Tim. We're going to make you our expert on that here in just a second, but Tracy's got her hand up real quick. Tracy?
Actually, yeah, no, my question was for Tim. So Tim, being, a participant of that and understanding, the struggles of, the tiny home build perspective for, both the builders as the DIYers and consumers, understanding some of those parameters that we're operating within. How do you see this affecting us? I can't say that I know it yet, and I'm going to have to go and do some reading on it pretty quick. But what do you see the struggles for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not probably a lot. Remind me that the maximum square footage of a tiny home is through
About
that
400.
building,
If
400.
if somebody's going to build the gigantic 40 by 10, it's going to be about 400 square feet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's usually the max trailer size.
Right. So that would end up falling under the threshold for the solar ready provisions. It has to be 600 square feet. Electric ready would only come into play if you have gas fired appliances. And I'm not sure if a lot of these tiny homes are pretty much all electric. If I
They are,
understand.
but there's a lot of people that want propane as well. So
Yeah, so propane is a mixed fuel under that state legislation. So it's minimum requirement on electric ready that says you need to run a proper size electrical circuit junction box and have a breaker space for a future electric appliance to take the place of that gas fired
got it.
appliance. Pretty simple, not very
Yep.
expensive. And then the EV portion only requires an EV on the residential side only requires an EV ready space inside the garage. But since tiny homes aren't doing garages, unless it's a detached garage that a homeowner wants to take, that's a separate thing that goes through the jurisdiction. So
Sure.
really very, very little impact on the tiny homes.
Tim, let's say somebody did want to connect a EV, because we have had a customer do it. And an electrician came out and the panel was already set for success. So he really just did the 50 amp hookup for the electric vehicle. So what, outside of that, would there be anything else that we would have to kind of be prepared for, do you think? I mean, that's perfect. You kind of put me at ease a little bit,
Yeah.
because I was already starting to worry, like, oh man, because we're worried about the fire suppression as well, that's one of our concerns as well, what you're talking about, and then also whether sprinkler systems are going to be required.
Yeah, you bet. In Broomfield, we just passed the residential sprinkler system. So if you were to do a tiny home to bring into our community, it would need to have the fire suppression, but that's a kind of a whole different discussion, I think, down the line with Sam. But from the electric ready, if you had a attached garage, I don't think you could do that to a tiny home. At least I don't know how that would work, but it would
It's not
need
gonna, yeah, that'd be super custom, Tim. And,
Yeah.
people aren't going to spend that time doing that. They're
Right.
going to build a different kind of structure. They're not going to do
Yep.
that. So I appreciate you for answering that. That actually helps me out a lot. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yep.
Tim, that's really good information. I appreciate that. I see, Mark, you've got your hand up.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to
Good morning.
If you adopt the 2021 edition of the codes in the 2020 NEC, is fire going to be involved in this, since the ESS systems have new requirements, the energy storage systems?
So I think that's one of the discussions that I was going to have with Sam is how much of the fire code we're going to be able to actually enforce. Because right now, the only thing that we defer is the fire suppression systems. But if we're talking about battery storage and stuff like that, all that's going to come into play. And we're actually on the 2023 NEC, so I have to look and see what those requirements are for the electrical. But yeah, I guess it depends on how much battery storage a unit's going to have. A tiny home or tiny house probably won't have that much, but
Right.
you get into these bigger units where you have a modular unit that has a basement where they're going to be storing some of the stuff. That's where we kind of have to draw that line of what's going to be local and what's going to be our program. Because if a lot of the stuff is being stored on site, but as part of the compliance of the structure, it might have to fall under our program. It's just, do we add that as part of OC form to finish the compliance of the installation of that battery storage.
Yeah, because it's also gonna depend on the type of battery. The VRLAs are still gonna be available, but they've changed some of the sizing of those. The smaller batteries aren't available hardly anymore. They're going to the larger sizes.
Mhm.
At least I talked to Eaton and a couple of the other people that supply those. Okay, I was just wondering because I just don't want this to come around and slap everybody like it did me when it first came out.
So like, again, right now, we don't currently adopt a IFC, but it's probably something that we really need to consider in the future.
Well, I'm not
But
sure how we get around it though, Donnie. I mean, it drags it into it. With the 2021 and the 2023, it drags everything, the fire code, everything but the mechanical code, which kind of surprised me. But it drags the building code, the fire code, and the electrical code all into one big conglomeration, basically.
Mhm. Yeah.
But okay, well, something we'll have to look at. And Donnie, you know how to get hold of me.
Yeah. The other thing I had just real quick was for Tim is we're really going to need your expertise in the energy readiness because as you know, we have structures that need items that need to be completed at the site location, but really defining what's going to be modular specific and what's going to be site specific. So like when we get into multifamily hotels and motels, right? There's going to be site specific items that need to be completed for possibly charging stations or other items like that. So we really need to define that in rule or make a clear process for manufacturers when they're developing these types of units, so that we can say, all right, this will fall under our program. This is going to fall under the local authorities program. Kind of like how we deal with 9-5. We'll take care of everything within the structure for 9-5, but everything that's being built on site for compliance for 9-5, which is the residential accessibility requirements for single family dwelling installations. So we're gonna have to take that basic concept of what's the state's authority and what's going to be the local authority, so that we can distinguish that in rule or through policy.
Yeah, I'll do what I can to help on that. I think Adam Berry with the CEO is going to be able to help also with his team. And it's an interesting question or scenario, I guess, Donnie, because a lot of jurisdictions, I'd say the majority of jurisdictions have not adopted this electric ready and solar ready code. They have I forget the deadline to have to do it, but it's at the beginning is predicated upon when you do a code update for your jurisdiction.
Yeah,
other than the electrical code. So they amended out the electrical code because they have a different process. So if a jurisdiction has not adopted the electric ready and solar ready, and then you're just talking about, okay, so certain things are supposed to be done by the locals. How does that come into play, from a legislative standpoint? I don't know how that works. That's going to be probably our attorney, maybe the two attorneys between the electric ready, they have an attorney, and then Sam and your attorney to figure out how that works and requiring the local jurisdiction to do what they need to do. I don't know that.
Yeah, so, well, to my understanding, by January 1st of 2025, it's a statewide thing that everybody's adopting the 21 or better version of the energy code plus the energy readiness requirements. So I would say by 2021, this is something that we need to consider because again, I think it's pretty clear that anything that's site built, open construction, including utility work, is all going to be local jurisdiction. But we need to get into that actual the requirements of the solar readiness and all that stuff, and actually draw that line in there and say like, all right, well, these are things that we know that will be under the modular program. And everything that's on this side of the line is going to be local inspection only. So that's where your expertise will come into play of, you know, what items are going to have to be installed on site for, like I said, charging stations. I think after you have a certain amount of parking spaces, you have to have a certain amount of charging stations for EV vehicles or electric vehicles.
Yep, there's a table in there for the numbers for whether it's residential or non-residential, so.
Yeah, so things like that, right? Or if there's anything else that needs to be site installed, specific that's going to be outside of the structured envelope.
Yeah,
Right.
and a lot of those requirements, like you said, were like this EV ready or solar ready, but especially the site work EV ready component has to go back to the panel boards that are not part of the building that you guys are reviewing and inspecting. I could see that being a challenge of that requirement for how do you size that? Or if we just went through a situation with a multifamily project with a swimming pool, which is pretty standard for, you know, as an amenity. And it was like 1 million BTU pool boiler. And the way the electric ready code says that would be part, because this is a mixed fuel. And that's going to increase the potential size of the panel boards. That's one of the challenges we just went through a couple of weeks ago on a project I'm doing. So I've got a little history with challenges, and Adam and I have been going back and forth he's been putting up with all my questions on intent. He's already got a good list going, which we can definitely share with this team.
Okay.
Well, good. I think I'll try to invite him next week. Now, I heard a couple things there. One, Tim, I understand the adoption as it goes forward by the local governments. But is it a hard requirement that everybody be on this, all the local governments be on this by January 1st or not? Do you know?
I know there's a deadline, I think, and Donnie, I didn't pull open that legislation, but I think Donnie's correct that the hard deadline is everyone in the state it's a January 1st. So up until that point, if you do a code adoption, you have to bring in the electric and solar ready. But at that point, which could very well be, like Donnie said, January 1st, 2025, it's going to be, you've got to adopt it. I don't know. And that's an answer I think could double check with Adam.
Yeah, well, that's a good question for Adam, and I'll read that legislation again.
Yeah.
Too.
I just don't remember. I mean, it's out of my mind because we already did it in Broomfield.
Yeah, it's done. That was yesterday's project, right, Tim?
Well, yeah, but I'm happy to go through. I've got if offline, Donnie, you could send me an email, and Sam, my staff has worked up a checklist for new residential to comply with the 3 components. And I'm happy to, you know, we're really good making up checklists for permit reviews and plan reviews, just like you guys. And I'm happy to share that with you that can share, and share that with the whole team or the whole group.
That might be useful, Tim, especially as we look at from the manufacturer side, and we might tweak it a little bit for tiny homes as we see, you know, as we highlight the 400, 600 square foot requirements for those type of activities.
Hey, Donnie, Sam,
Yeah.
on the installers, how's this going to affect the installers? If these are all they're all PV ready? Is this just going to be Dora doing, since it's an electrical system?
Installers of the,
If they install a single family dwelling and it's PV ready, who's going to put the panels and who's going to do the wiring for the inverters and stuff?
so that's a good question. The thing is that per statute, the definition of an installer is the person who sets the unit on the foundation system and does a structural connection from unit to unit. That's all they're responsible for. So if the manufacturer relies on the dealer or the seller to hire a contractor to finish the rest of those connections, at the end of the day, if something was to not be completed, the correction notice would be sent to the manufacturer because they're the ones that submitted the plans for the the compliance of that structure when it comes to the electric ready and solar ready provisions.
Yeah, 'cause that's gonna be an OC list.
Yeah, it's anything that's basically anything that's required for the unit, for the compliance of the unit, when it comes to the building codes, is gonna be on the OC. So if it can't be completed at the factory and has to be completed at the site location, it's gonna need to be on that OC form. And I think a lot of the manufacturers are already seeing that every home that they're building right now has an OC form, because there's always something that needs to be completed at the site location.
Right.
Unless like it's a one box unit that comes with all the insulation underneath the floors and all that. There's not very much that they need to do at the site location, but just about every single unit now is being built with the OC form, and then in the future with the solar ready and electric ready stuff, it's gonna be just about every single home.
So I'm making a kind of a list of general questions to help Adam come prepared to the next meeting. Anybody else have any questions or comments or concerns on either the 2021 IECC or the model electric and solar ready code?
I guess, Stan, I always
Go ahead,
ask,
Mike, you started talking. And
yeah,
then I'll-
sorry. I guess my only question is, have the local jurisdictions, I know Tim was just talking about it, but by and large, we used to have like a gauge of local, like what primarily the local jurisdictions had adopted in order to like see where we are in relation to what the locally adopted, the generally adopted codes are. Have most of the local jurisdictions already adopted this 21?
I don't know the answer to that, Mike. I know that we're seeing a lot more move up to 2021. Some are already pushing 2024. Some are waiting to see. I know when I was at the county level, we always let at least the most current code set get worked out for a couple years before we jumped in and adopted it. And then there's also, of course, the impact on the manufacturers on changing code sets on a frequent basis. So it's a really good question, Mike. If we go back and take a look at the law and says if they have to, if the locals are having to do this, or and what their deadline to do that is. And then we can always, from our perspective, as we adopt this, it'll be, plans can be, approved plans, Donnie, correct me if I say this wrong, approved plans can be continued to be built, but you've got 180 days to come in compliance with this January 1 date.
Yeah, so anything that started construction with the old approvals is okay to continue. But after that 180-day mark, if you're still building off that same plan, is when it needs to be updated. And then if let's say it's a site-specific home and you needed to build another one after that adoption, it needs to go into effect.
And that's what we did with the NEC. Sumit? And then Tim?
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I had a question regarding the electric and the solar code there. In terms of like a small equipment shelter, like commercial equipment shelters that we build, ones that go to power plants and things like that, how would it apply to those kind of buildings? Our buildings are generally less than 200 square feet in space. So would those regulations apply for those kind of buildings?
I'm going to look at our expert Tim for that. That's a really good question.
Based on that language in the legislation, or I should say, the electric ready, that would fall under. There are no exceptions.
Okay.
But that's going to be something that you'd have to bring up. So there is a section in the administrative part of the solar ready and the electric ready code. There's two sections. One is you can request for a waiver to meet that code if it's a natural disaster. So let's say you had the Marshall Fire, you had whatever tornado type of a thing. And then there's another section that you can request for a waiver based on the cost. I think it's a 2% maximum. You'd have to go to the adopting jurisdiction to say the cost to comply with this solar and electric ready and EV ready exceeds 2%. I don't have the exact language. So when we're going through the discussion here as the group in terms of how to adopt this code, that'll be something I think that needs to be reviewed in depth by Sam and Donnie's group. I recommended, I should say, to our city council to amend out, I should say, that potential request for the cost differential waiver. And we called that a strengthening amendment. And primarily because almost everything I've seen so far, the cost difference is over 2%. And when I went to my supervisor before we took it to council, I figured if we had that in there, I would be spending me or all my staff time reviewing the request for the 2%. But I just want to point that out as you're moving forward to look at that closely, maybe to start out of the gate, Sam and Donnie. And that would be making it more restrictive in a way, but we were able to do that from CEO standpoint. So just a comment there.
Okay. Yeah. Just say in our case, I think we build, shelters for power plants. We build the shelters here and some plan to power plant facilities where they will install it. So I'm not quite sure how the electric ready would apply in our case. I can certainly see solar ready, but yeah, I think I guess maybe it's a discussion moving forward, for our type of buildings or equipment buildings that we build for other places where it'll be installed.
It might come into play if you're using gas or mixed fuel appliances.
Ours are just commercial shelters. They're just equipment buildings that, they supply, we have electronic equipment in there that will monitor some emissions and stuff from power plants. But there isn't any appliances or anything of that kind of sort in our buildings.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's just one of those, it depends. That's the answer. But yeah, I guess when we get to that point, we'll just have to see what you're submitting.
Okay.
If there's anything that will apply.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Good discussion so far, everybody. Anybody else have anything before I jump back to the slide deck? So homework assignment or recommendation, since I can't give you a homework assignment, is to really dive into this the 2021 IECC and specifically the Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code. We'll have a guest hopefully at the next meeting. I'll confirm that with Adam Berry. I ran into him last week at CCICC and it was just a passing in the hall type of thing. So he knows Mo and I have talked to him about coming, so we'll get him lined up, and then I'll make sure that everybody else on the TAC knows that he's coming, and there's any other questions for him, we maybe can have those questions sent in to me and Donnie, so we can help Adam prep a little bit and make that a very productive use of our time. Does that sound good to everybody? All right, great. I'm going to go back and share. All right, so the next discussion topic is standardized climatic standards for modular. So this is something that Mo said he's been wanting to do at time, and we've talked about it a little bit with building codes and standards. Donnie and I have talked about it, and I've talked about it with manufacturers. And would it be beneficial to the industry, I guess is the question, to consider an effort to provide standardized climatic standards so that you're building a unit that is one set of wind, snow, and winter design temps. And what I had originally contemplated was a regional type of thing, and I think that came out of the Senate Bill 213 discussions and looking at how to be more efficient. As you know, could it be a Front Range, a mountain, Western Slope type of set of standards that all the manufacturers could build to, and it could be adopted either as an opt-in or not. But the other option, I guess, is just to build three classes of units that could be built with just a base 1, base 2, and base 3 that already meets the current local conditions. Now, Donnie, I know you and Greg, who's our engineer, had talked a little bit about this too. Are you ready to share anything? Can you just kind of talk through what you were thinking?
Yeah, I can kind of give you guys an idea of kind of the path that we're trying to follow. Is one of the things that we're still trying to work out is the winter design temp requirement, because that's going to vary between -22 all the way to 16 degrees when it comes to winter design temp. And so that's going to be the hardest component to really comply with at a statewide level. But what we did is, if you look at the IECC energy tables for the thermal envelopes, was it climate zone 4, and then 5 marine, and 6 and 7 and 8. If you look at the energy tables or the thermal envelope table, there's not a very big gap when it comes to insulation requirements. I think the biggest gaps that you'll see is for mass walls, which you're not going to be doing a mass wall at the manufacturing level. Everything's either going to be wood or steel. And then also the slab requirements. There's, not saying that these units aren't going to be installed on slabs, but there's not very many units that are being installed on slabs. Other than I know Key Structures had some slab on grade installations. But those are the biggest differences in the thermal envelope when it comes to our values. So if we can do a couple routes, we can make 2 regions possibly, one for zone 4, which is just a small area in the southeastern corner of Colorado. I think it's like 3 counties that are zone 4 in Colorado. And then the second zone would be like the rest of Colorado, which is you can build to the basically the highest climate zone in Colorado is climate zone 7. So if you built to climate zone 7, the insulation values for the wood walls or steel frame walls and just about everything else within that thermal envelope table is going to be the same, other than some SHG, the glazing in the doors requirement, I think has like a 0.4 for zone 4 and zone 5. But again, if you wanted to go the prescriptive route, if you built to climate zone 7, it would fit all the other climate zones. And it'd be slightly better than zone 4, and then slightly better than zone 5 when it comes to energy code compliance. And if you look at the thermal envelope for the walls, it's like a R20 plus 5. Well, I don't know any place that sells a R20 insulation. Most of the insulation that you buy is the R21. So it's I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference. But another route is if you do like a res check, right? You follow the second path of compliance, and you don't go the prescriptive route. If you submitted a res check that was compliant with climate zone 7, that res check, if you get a passing score of 0 or better, it would be a passing score of 0 or better for all the other climate zones. And again, if you look at the thermal envelope requirements for those climate zones, there's not a big difference in energy. It's either 20 plus 5, or I think it's like 13 plus something, or just 20 continuous all around the building. And that's pretty much for every climate zone. We can try to see if we could break it down even further, which I'm sure it's possible, but to the point of everything being almost exactly the same, would there be any reason to break it up into more than one or two zones for energy compliance? Now, when you talk about the winter design temp compliance, one of the things that we're talking about is the mechanical system being a OC item. And it's basically you would build the home to meet the climate zone requirements of Colorado. And then once you get to the site location, you just submit either a plan to the locals, or you can submit the plan to the Division of Housing with a mechanical system that is compliant with that site specific information. So basically you have a home that's built to meet any climate zone, any snow load, any wind load for anywhere in Colorado. The only thing that's going to be different is going to be the mechanical system and how that load calc is going to be calculated when you enter that winter design temp, because that's the one that's going to vary the most. Like I said, it's from -22 all the way to 16. And the other thing too is if you had another option that we're thinking is if you had a unit that can be adjusted between a certain degree change. So if you had one that goes from 0 to -22, well, then you would fit in a category that or an area in Colorado where the winter design temp can be is between 0 and -22, and you just adjust the mechanical unit between those degrees. And then if it's 0 to 16, you just adjust that mechanical unit from 0 to 16. But I'm not too familiar with how well these units can be adjusted, especially when you're talking about mini splits and a gas-fired appliance, because the code doesn't, or the new energy code is not going to require you to put an electrical heating unit. But if you wanted to use a gas-fired appliance, you can. It's just how well does a gas-fired appliance adjust compared to an electrical heating appliance adjust. So we're still kind of walking through the process and seeing if we can find better ways to do it. But that's kind of the path that we're following right now. I think on the energy side of things for thermal envelope, I think it's, at least to us, it's pretty straightforward with the all the climate zones that are within Colorado are almost exactly the same insulation requirements. So again, the biggest difference is the mass wall, which I don't know any factories that build mass wall modulars. So, but if you know of any, let me know, and then we can kind of retalk our path.
Hey, Donnie, this is Sean. So I hear what you're saying is the R value differences are not that much. What about U values and windows and such?
No, like if you look at the energy table, it's or the thermal envelope table itself, the insulation values are almost exactly the same. And then when you're talking about windows and stuff, it's still 0.30 for the U factor or the fenestration requirements. The only one that's different, I believe, is it's a SHG requirement, which is, I think, in climate zone 4, it's 0.4. And then I can't remember if it's in climate zone 5 and 4 marine, where it says 0.4 as well. But I think every manufacturer right now submits a res check. So that's what I'm saying. There's two options there. If you want to go prescriptive route, you can use that table. If you want to go the res check route, you would build to the climate zone 7, because in climate zone 7, if you have a passing score in climate zone 7, then anything that's less than that in climate zone 6, 5, 4, you're going to have a passing score that's higher than what's required for that climate zone. So
Okay, yeah.
that's just because it's a climate zone requirements aren't as stringent, I guess. But again, it's like I said, if you look at the table, there's very minute differences in the insulation requirements.
Yeah, again, I probably need to do some research and just figure out, talk with the manufacturers and see where the differences are. I mean, right now it's coming down to, energy efficiency is great, but it comes down to cost. What's it going to cost to do? Because we're seeing a huge migration away from modular and more back into HUD from a consumer standpoint. So just want to make sure we're all cognizant of where the pricing of, we got to make changes. I get it, but we just need to try and do it as cost effectively as possible.
So I want to go to Tracy and then to Mark, but I mean, this is a discussion on whether this is a good thing for the modular industry in the state, and that is um, because we deal with 320 jurisdictions, right? Is it better to streamline a couple of classes of design values, or and is that trade-off better? So yeah, Sean, I can see where you need to talk to them and think that through with everything and see if that makes sense. Nate, you too. But Tracy, you had a couple questions in the chat, and I think this. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that we accommodate tiny homes to the best we can too. Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like I hear Donnie saying, hey, if you design and build to level 7, then usually that'll satisfy the majority of the jurisdictions across the state. I think he said maybe -3 counties, if I heard that right.
Yep.
Or he talked about the 2 zones, right? And Donnie, I'm sorry if I got it wrong. You can definitely correct me if I misunderstood anything. But I guess my question, is it usually comes down to costs. Also, we sometimes don't know where things are going. And so that's why this topic is always of interest to me. But I've also had some lessons learned too with, just throwing the maximum at it doesn't solve the pains either. It does for, the check boxes, but not for the consumer and not for the builder. So I guess, what's the R value in number 7 zone, Donnie, if do you have it? I didn't have that link.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was driving.
So I put the table in the chat, but so
Oh,
let's.
awesome.
I'm gonna go for climate zone 4 down to climate zone 7 and 8. So if you're looking at wood frame wall, the insulation requirements is R20 in the cavity plus 5 continuous, or 13 plus 10 continuous, or 0 plus 15, right? And then so 4 and 5 are exactly the same. It's 20 plus 5, or 13 plus 10, or 0 and 15 continuous.
Yeah,
Now
the walls
time
usually
zones.
aren't our issues. I think we do usually in the tiny house world. I think we do a good job in the walls and in the floor. I think we always exceed it. It's always the roof for us, right? Because of the lofts. What's the roof?
Yeah, well, let me finish that, and then I'll show you so you understand what I'm talking about with the how
Okay.
it's exactly the same, so or similar. So the only thing that's different between 4, 5, and then climate zone 6 and 7 is that when you go from 5 to 6, it has it's still 20 plus 5, or 13 plus 10, or a 0 plus 20. So it'd be 0 cavity, 20 continuous, right? And so when you go to 6 and 7, it's exactly the same. So the only difference between 4, 5, 6, and 7 is you go from plus 15 continuous to plus 20 continuous. That's the only difference. And that's only if you do the prescriptive method. And when you go from floors, there's a difference there. You go from 19, 30 to 38. So 19 for 4, 30 for 5 and 6, and then 38 for 7, right? But a lot of the modulars, it's going to be different for tiny homes because tiny homes don't have, you're probably put insulation underneath the floors at the factory, but modulars, either going to go in a crawl space or a basement.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, our floors are usually about an R34, 35. So once you said 38, I said,
yeah, but there's the thing is that's if you follow the prescriptive path.
yeah, I
If you
gotcha.
don't, if you go res check, you can adjust your insulation values. If you put a higher insulation in your walls, you might not have to put an R38 in your floors. You might be able to get away with a R34 or whatever what you're getting in your floors, or if you upgrade your windows, that might be another adjustment, right? So there's many ways to comply, but what I was trying to point out is that the insulation values for those climate zones are minute. It's it's only slightly increased if you're going to do a complete continuous insulation all around of the structure. So
Okay. Thanks, Donnie. Thanks, Tracy. Mark, I think you were next, and then Nate.
Yeah, Donnie, just to there are some mass walls, but they're usually in equipment shelters. We have some concrete shelters that are electrical switching. We have fire pump houses that are mass. but they're unoccupied. Well, there is no unoccupied building. I understand that in the code, but you know what I mean, though, that it's usually just for qualified people and stuff. So are we looking at doing something for equipment shelters to help on that end of it?
Yeah, I think what they can probably do is just see if they can meet the low energy provisions. There's low energy buildings in the IBC. And so if they can meet those provisions, I'm not sure how the electric ready and solar ready would affect those types of buildings, but
Right.
if it's a low energy building, I don't know why they can't do that. And that's probably one of the other things I want to talk to Sam is we do have jurisdictions that allow cabins to be built. Well, there's no cabin provisions in the IRC.
Right.
And creating something for them so that we can get modular cabins that don't meet the requirements of a dwelling, but is basically like a sleeping unit, right? It has a kitchen, bedroom, and a dining area, and a bathroom, but maybe, or it's missing one of the 5 components of a dwelling, right? And that can be used as a cabin for somewhere up in the mountains. Larimer County has a good amendment in their ordinance for cabins specifically, and I think that's another way. And maybe it's not specific to cabins, but maybe it's something that's amended in a way that would allow those types of structures to be built in Colorado.
Thanks, Donnie.
Donnie, you were talking a little bit about quality time for me and you to discuss this. Maybe Monday morning as we head toward the world of modular, we have seats one in front of each other and we can whisper back and forth for 4 hours.
We can send kites, some notes back and forth.
Nate?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of give a little bit more context to everyone. So there's part of the reason why, I think it's interesting that we're looking at this is really because, the state is very interested in trying to make sure that that factories are able to lower their cost of construction as much as possible. And from a factory level standpoint, that can primarily be done through efficiencies because you're building the same product again and again and again. You have the same assembly again and again and again. You're building it the same way every time it comes down the line. And so part of the reasoning for like something like Donnie's describing is to be able to allow a factory, and I would also say on this, if they choose, I don't necessarily think that we're going to come out and say, every factory has to build to climate zone 7 for everything they're going to send to Colorado. That's not what Donnie's proposing. What Donnie's proposing is a system where if a factory wants to standardize on that to pick up those efficiencies from a operational standpoint, they have the option to. And then basically, if we can get it so the jurisdictions will buy into that, then that factory can produce a single product that can go possibly anywhere in the state. And so, there's a focus on that. And so I think because there's a lot of rumblings around that concept right now in the state, this is kind of an opportunity for us to demonstrate how that could work. From a, this is, we talked about it. We came up with this, opt-in version of it. We also have the opportunity to do this on the fire code as well this year, to possibly kind of also use that as an illustration to kind of tee up a larger conversation, which is kind of that conversation we've all been knowing is coming about trying to, kind of redo some items that are actually in our statute to be able to increase, modular production in our state. And so you have to take these conversations in the context of the bigger picture about what, might be unfolding over the course of the next year and a half or so in our state. And this is a great kind of foundation opportunity for us to throw out some options on how it could work.
I think, Nate. Yeah, and just to be clear, it's more of an option approach. It's not saying that everybody has to do it.
Right.
So it kind of answers Mike's concern in the chat. Unfortunately, he left already, but it's just an option. It's not going to be something that's going to be required.
Right.
So we do get a lot of conversations with manufacturers that want to build a statewide compliant structure, especially for like Tracy's industry with the tiny homes or
Right.
tiny homes. They want to build a
ADUs,
structure that can go anywhere. Yep,
ADUs.
ADUs.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So it's more of an option. It's not, I don't think it's going to be a requirement. But even if it was a requirement, the installation, if you go prescriptive route, there's not very many differences in the energy code compliance. Again, like I said, the only difference is when you get into the part where you want to do a continuous insulation around the entire structure. That's the only difference when you're talking about wood frame construction. And then some slight differences in mass walls or slab on grade insulation. So very slight differences, but again, it'd be proposed as an option. And then you just never know how down the road, if the energy code gets more strict,
Right.
they might all be the same down the road. So you never know.
Tracy?
Well, I guess I was just gonna kind of, speak from a little smaller mom and pop perspective, right? And we see the costs. We want to do the right things for the customers. We love efficiencies. We get the big picture of it, but then we also take into consideration that we're on wheels and our people have no land and they don't know where they're going. And so from an ethics perspective and a roadworthy perspective, we take all of those things into consideration to do the right things, right? When you go into our shoes, this isn't just a foundation built somewhere, right? Where you have some very specific rules you get to follow and you're golden, you know where your customer lives. We don't have addresses sometimes, right? And so that's why it's of interest to us to understand that level 7. And that's why we already do it. Matter of fact, I was just talking to Austin, who's the owner of our company. And I said, hey, what's in our floor and da, 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 da. And he's like, blah, 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 blah. And we're probably already there. We're probably already exceeding it because we have to account for some of these things. So, we it's not that we don't want to, do all the wonderful, great stuff, but we also have to consider staying RV for some of these people too, and keeping it lighter and more mobile and things. So we're always, struggling with the decision, right? Is this customer going RV or is this customer going state certified? Right? We still struggle with those questions with our customers. I mean, I've been doing this now since we've been acting as if, for 6 months already, right? And conversing, in that perspective. But so these are big deals for us when you talk about the installation values and, do we build to just 1 level, 2 levels? So, these are important discussion items for us. I will tell you this, the costs are definitely up. And so affordable living, it's definitely getting harder. And so cost has to be something that it's got to be a trade-off, guys, right? Is the cost and the extra, our value worth really doing? And sometimes it's easier for us as a manufacturer just to stick to one thing, but sometimes the costs, the trade-off's not there for the customer.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Tracy. That's a perfect segue. I need to move into some other slides in the essence of time, but I think both Nate's point and your point and Sean's point all make it very clear that, and perhaps I should have approached it a little bit better, saying as optional models for manufacturers to build. So let's keep that in mind as we continue to look at different options in our rules to accommodate this. The other thing I will say is there is an accessory dwelling unit bill moving through the legislature too, and it does ask for a model code to be developed for that we can provide the modular industry. So that might also, if I remember right, unless it got amended out, that might also be an opportunity to move this forward. And maybe, Nate, it's 1 step at a time, All right, great. So let me go to go back to sharing my screen real quick. And we're going to move through some of these other slides. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I'm halfway through the deck. Oh, and then we get to talk about fire suppression. So this may take up the rest of our time, but I'll cut it off in about 10 minutes so that we can go through the rest of the slides. So there's still a lot of discussion on fire suppression system requirements. I'm just wanting to see, kind of check in with TAC if there's still any issues around quarries, local fire suppression requirements, how that's working out for the residential units. Then, of course, the Denver Fire Prevention and Control, DFPC, is mandating inspections for more extensive sprinkler systems. And I'm also very trying to have discussions with them before Donnie and I are out next week to kind of move that one forward. And then there's Senate Bill 23-166, which was signed, and that's the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board and model codes for an area that are within what this group defines as a wildland urban interface. And there are some interesting, Donnie and I went to a session on this, sponsored by CCICC. There's some interesting mixes of how you calculate out different levels of fire suppression requirements with respect to building materials, with respect to water flow and available water. And so some of that stuff we think we're going to have to take into account maybe also by July 1 of 2025. So not that far down the road, about a year away. So let's just have a general discussion on this. I'm going to stop sharing so we can visit, but is there any discussion on quarries or local fire suppression requirements or any of these topics?
I want to ask a few questions.
Okay.
Okay. So on the I'm not familiar with the wildfire code. Is there a chance that provides some of the standardization that we've been kind of whining about from the standpoint of local jurisdictions having their own, fire resistant material codes and things like that, across the state? Is that going to provide some standardization of that, or is it still going to, kick out to the local stuff?
I don't know. Again, I know we are only
Tim
talking
knows.
about within the wildland urban fire interface. If they define that, to me, it's almost every place in the state, but I don't think that's going to pass. I think it's going to be those mountain communities where you have more trees, although we get a lot of grass fires out here. Tim, you've got your hand up. Do you know the answer to that?
Maybe.
Okay.
I sound like a politician. Never mind. We're tracking that. We've got a staff member. They just had a meeting a couple of days ago. We're monitoring that very closely. And it's my understanding from the way that board is set up and what the intent of getting that state legislation will be, is that group, the state group, will be charged with getting information from the local fire districts as to what parts of their jurisdiction would meet like a high fire or medium fire. They've got 3 designations, I understand. And then the state will be putting together a map of each jurisdiction, and then they will come to that jurisdiction and say, you need to enforce this level of WUI code in that area. So some communities up on the mountains might be the whole thing, and they might already be doing
And that WUI code will spell out the construction
Yes,
details.
that
Okay.
is correct.
Okay.
For what
Okay.
needs to be done. And apparently in Broomfield, it'll probably be just certain portions of the perimeter and not the infill part. And it's all, as we know, a result of the Marshall Fire, where the state legislators took it on their own to say, we're going to try to make sure that doesn't happen again. And rural communities anywhere. So that's what I'm hearing from at least the meeting that we just listened to and reading the state legislation. But it will set out what those parameters are for I think it's 3 different levels, but there'll be,
Right.
construction standards. So if that helps.
Well, and so what's really interesting is what Tim just described is what we're talking about doing on various portions of our code.
Yeah,
High, medium, low. Go ahead and pick which one you guys want. Now we'll enforce it. Yeah,
yeah, with a map overlay.
with a map overlay, obviously, but okay. All right. So
Right.
Tim, like, I
I'm
guess
sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Tim, you think that that process will start to allow factories to be able to understand the materials that they need to stock to meet Colorado's wildfire construction requirements across the state instead of having to figure it out for each jurisdiction.
That's the way I understand that legislation. It's going to take it out of the locals. It's another
Okay.
step of kind of losing our home rule type concept in the state, but that's
Right.
a different discussion that I could spend an hour on.
I know
think
you could. Yeah,
Janine-
but
I
in
see
general.
Janine's hand. She may be saying something about home rule, but anyway, that's the way I understand it.
And before I go to Donnie and then Janine, the way I understand it is there is a Wildland Urban Interface ICC code, and it does spell out those construction materials that go within that unit. Donnie?
Yeah, I just want to add real quick, one of the things that we're gonna have to look into is there's specific writing in that that bill or the bill that was passed that says that if there's a governing agency within that jurisdiction has to adopt a wildfire mitigation code. But the thing is you got to remember our program oversees construction for multifamily hotels and motels and jurisdictions without a building department. So if that requirement falls under us for an adoption of the WUI, we might have to consider that in our rulemaking as well. And so probably during the conversation that we have with Colorado Fire Prevention and Control, we might be able to get some more clarification on that, but we might have to talk to our attorneys and see if that legally, if it's our responsibilities for adopting a WUI for those jurisdictions. And right now, I think we were at 16, and I think we're down to like 14 or 13 jurisdictions now that do not have building departments, because in the past year or so, there has been some new building departments that sprouted out of some of these jurisdictions. So just want to give everybody that heads up as well.
Thanks, Donnie. Janine?
Yes, sir. So there's also, with that state legislation, the bill was written pretty loosely, that got adopted. The problem is, like Park County, if you have fire districts throughout your county, you don't have to comply. It's only if you have areas that aren't covered by a fire protection district. National Forest is exempt. So you're going to see corridors that don't have to comply with the WUI codes. So just a heads up on that. Now, like the town of Fairplay, they may have to comply, but some of the counties were exempt in the way that they wrote that document. So just a heads up on that. If you read it real closely, I know Park's exempt, Teller is not. Summit County is exempt except for their population may drive there. Their urban corridor with I-70 might drive it. But there are exemptions for counties, not cities and counties, but just counties. So just a heads up on that.
That's interesting, Janine. I didn't know that. If you
Yeah.
could help and point me to chapter and verse on that in an email, I'll follow up on that.
You bet.
Yeah, I know, for example, with Elbert County, and I don't know if there's a population threshold on this thing too. We had historically areas, big ranches that had opted out of the fire districts. With 7 different fire districts in the county, almost everything was covered except 30,000 acres.
Yeah. And that would prompt the regulations
Interesting. Well,
because it's not national forest.
that's the county's problem now, not mine.
Yep.
Nate?
my comment, that's very helpful, obviously. Long term, I would view us looking to move towards where if those places that Janine was just outlining, where those locations are given the same medium, high, low choice, even though they might have their own version of their own fire code. I would love it if we could get to the point where you can go into them and you say you can still have whatever you want, high, medium, low, just tell us what you want. But it allows us to, at least at a factory level, to standardize on a bunch of materials versus, again, still having all sorts of different versions of it out there. That's the next step. That's 5 steps from now. So
Okay, thanks, Nate. Anybody else want to talk anything else about fire prevention or fire suppression systems?
I wanted to ask about the sprinkler stuff, the inspection, because I know like NTA is having a heart attack right now dealing with. Can you give us the gist on that?
Donnie, can you give us the just an overview of that, what the concerns are there? I know it deals with a couple of different residential versus multifamily and the higher level sprinkler system or IBC sprinkler systems.
Yeah, so I think there's I think 2 main concerns. One, not having enough qualified people, because the rule that was passed by Colorado Fire Prevention and Control required all the fire suppression inspectors at the manufacturer to register with the state of Colorado Fire Prevention and Control. So that's one concern, is just not having enough personnel. And that kind of plays into the next concern, is the price increase for inspections, because the inspectors need to be, at least to my understanding, the inspectors need to be at the factory location just about every single day for these units, because they're pumping out a sleeping unit like every other day or every day. And these fire suppression systems are being installed and need to be inspected, which means that inspector needs to be there that day to inspect it, to certify it before it goes to the next stage, or at a stage where it's going to get concealed. So that it increases the price of inspections.
Is NTA frustrated because Denver did that, but no other states require that?
I don't know if that's the frustration. The 2 points that I understand is that there's not enough people, and then the amount of time that an inspector has to be at the site location, which drives up the cost. So I think previous communication that I've seen is that for one project, it drove up the inspection cost an additional $50,000 for a multifamily project, and that's just in addition to the fire suppression inspections.
And is that because of the type of inspector? Like, where is the frequency of inspection requirement coming from?
Well, the requirement comes from the fire code, right? For inspection, the required inspections for the fire suppression system.
Okay.
So we didn't adopt the IFC, right? Like I mentioned earlier, but we also defer the sprinkler requirements to the locals, right? So our rules and our statute don't specifically mention anything for fire sprinkler system. So when Colorado Fire Prevention made that rule, they had all the authority to do so, because we didn't cover it in ours. So they had the authority to do so. So you would have to follow their requirements for the inspection process, which my understanding is everything, just like any other component, needs to be inspected prior to concealment. And then the Corey, the manufacturer, follows that unit to the site location where the local jurisdiction will take over and then do the final connection and the final test for that unit. But if you're having to send an inspector there to the manufacturer every single day, and that one person that you have registered with the state of Colorado lives out of state, that means you have to fly that person out there, stay there, do those inspections weekly, fly back home, come back out again, do those inspections weekly, fly back home. So that's what it is. It's the amount of time is just about every single day.
Okay.
So
We'll talk offline.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we are starting to lose a few people, so I think we're going to probably wrap this up as far as the content that we have on the agenda. I'm gonna flip through the slides real quick and kind of queue up the next meeting. And we'll roll some of this stuff over. And of course, if anybody has any last parting comments, they can certainly do that also. So looking ahead, we're going to talk a little bit about the ICC MBI 1200 to 1221 standards adoption. I'm kind of setting up a meeting to maybe talk to some of those folks that put that together next week. If anybody's going out to Orlando for the World of Modular, let us know. We'd be happy to get together with you too and solve all the world's problems in the lounge. So happy to do that. And then the next discussion also, we were going to have a little bit about tiny homes and just to kind of see if there was anything that you guys thought needs to be adjusted in our rules from the manufacturer's perspective or just the local governments, if they had any questions on tiny homes. We are starting to see tiny home villages pop up. One popped up as a PUD over on the West Slope, and they are allowing, it's not a modular and it's not a mobile home. So it's an interesting concept of where tiny homes can be located. And then also with the code sets, really we need to define this at the next meeting, I think, so we can start looking at our previous amendments and then moving forward to see if we need to amend the whatever code set we're going to. So our current code set, as you know, is the 18 with the 15 IECC. We have no options available on IECC. We have to go to 2021. I guess we have an option to go to 2024 if we wanted to, but I don't believe that 2024 code set is ready for adoption by us yet. That's my personal opinion. You can certainly argue that with me if you want to. There's also the option of staying on the current code set and then trying to figure out if we're gonna, I know we have been on 2018. Donnie, you said since 2019. Was that the date that we adopted that, you think?
Yeah, I think 2018 is when we went from was it something 35 to the CC or the CCR 1302-14.
Okay. So we've been on that one for a while. So I have an inclination or a thought that we just go to 2021 code set now. And then we keep that in place until at least probably 27. But that's again some discussion that we can have at the next meeting. And next meeting will be April 9th. So go ahead and mark off this time on your calendars. I'll make sure the invites get out. And other than that, I'm going to wrap it up and thank everybody for coming today with 1 minute to spare. Anybody else want to say anything else before we stop recording and shut down?
Sam and Donnie, you want to stay on for a second?
Yep, happy to. Anybody else want to have anything else to say? All right, thank you all. We'll talk to you again April 9th. If things come later, feel free to send me comments throughout between now and then that we can collect and maybe get addressed before the next meeting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.